Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Danny McCoy. I'm a white male, graying hair, I think, wearing a blue suit and a green tie today. So that's me, and very welcome to this webinar on disability and employment. And we're very happy in Ibec to be collaborating with Employers for Change and for Open Doors on today's topic of the employment and disability interconnection. Today we will be joined by two ministers. We're very fortunate. Minister Damien English will say a few words after I make my opening remarks. And then we're also very fortunate to have the Minister of State Responsibility for Disability and Rabbitte TD. Also joined by Seán Brady. Seán is co-founder of Cloud Assist. My colleague, Dr. McGann, Head of Social Policy at Ibec, and Christabelle Feeney, Director of the Employers for Change. And Christabelle will lead the panel discussion a little later on. So first up, just some opening remarks from me. Ibec has been involved in the area of disability for many decades. We've been supporting and promoting the employment of people with disabilities and trying to remove the barriers faced for people with disabilities, as I said, for many years. In the past, we have developed best practice guidelines for employers in conjunction with the Irish Congress of Trade Unions under the Workway project. We've also been involved in developing a disability passport, which addresses the kind of reasonable accommodations that people would require in the workplace for the relationship between an employee with disabilities and the employer. And again, that was in collaboration with the Congress of Trade Unions. And also, we have, under the Comprehensive Employment Strategy for People with Disabilities, we've partnered with the Irish Small and Medium Enterprise, ISME, and the Chambers Ireland to oversee a pilot project for Employer Disability Information Service. And this is the precursor, in fact, to Employers for Change. The policy paper that's been launched today on that topic of disability and employment, which Ibec has produced again with the collaboration of Employers for Change, seeks to present the barriers that are hindering the greater levels of employment of people with disabilities, and to offer alternative recommendations that we believe will make a real difference for individuals and for both existing and hopefully potential employers. People with disabilities are significantly underrepresented in Ireland's workforce. Despite legislation on equality in the workplace, people with disabilities do not experience the same access to employment opportunities as their counterparts for a variety of reasons. Despite the period of sustained economic growth in Ireland over the last decade, which saw our unemployment rate fall to around 5%, the outcomes for people with disabilities have been slow to change. And whilst this is a worldwide problem, in Ireland, a person with a disability is just over half as likely to be employed as a non-disabled peer, with 36.5% of people in the age bracket 15 to 64 with a disability at work, in contrast to near 73% of people without a disability. So we see that stark percentage change, 36% versus 73%. Furthermore, Ireland's rate of unemployment amongst people with disabilities was half the European average. And that gap between the employment rate of people with or without disabilities was also the second widest within the European Union. The social model of disability, which is used by the United Nations in their Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, believes that it is a societal, attitudinal, and structural barriers which make the individual who is disabled, as opposed to the medical condition of those people. So again, it is societal, attitudinal, and structural barriers, not the medical condition, that give rise to this situation. And again, as we look across, we can see that the capacity as a society to be able to create accessible and equitable employment for all through our structures and attitudes is the way forward. And that's what the policy paper is really addressing. There are substantial costs to individuals and to society associated with this underrepresentation in employment of people with disabilities. Employment is positive, we know, for not just people's incomes, but for their health, for their social status, and for their relationships. It is integral to the social inclusion and economic welfare of people with disabilities. So employment is the core tenet of independent living, a central part of most adults' lives, and for many people, a key part of their identity. As such, the lack of employment is excluding many people with disabilities from being part of this fundamental opportunity and being part of the wider community. In the paper that we've launched today, we examine the focus and direction of expenditure of public funds in this area to identify where the priorities are and whether changes in approach could yield better economic and societal outcomes for individuals, for employers, and for wider society. From the individual side, research shows reasons for low employment rates can include low expectations, fears about loss of benefits, prohibitive rules around the retention of benefits versus the number of working hours, but also attitudes and stereotypes are also prevalent. While many employers successfully employ people with disabilities, for others with limited disability know-how and a fear of the unknown can be particularly significant issues for the problems that we're trying to address. Concerns over costs of reasonable accommodation, fears of legal liability, and challenges navigating current supports will add to concerns of potential risks of employing a person with a disability. Our panel today will discuss some of the challenges to the existing supports, and in the paper we set out the differences in expenditure and income supports versus employment supports. We believe that there is scope to reap significant benefits, both societal and fiscal, through expanding employment supports for those with disabilities. This not alone will have a significant positive outcome for the individuals in terms of their economic outcomes, achievement of social inclusion, the psychosociological benefits on mental health and well-being, on the incidence of poverty and isolation, but also the overall integration into participation within our society. There are knock-on effects for the economy associated with the reduction of reliance on supports and the easing of costs of economic dependency, as well as the associated outcomes of having individuals gainfully employed, including the consequences for their individual tax and spending contributions. Building on the existing framework, further initiatives by our government and by businesses working together will be necessary to achieve a significant improvement in labour market outcomes for people with disability. We will need to take a collaborative approach across both the public and private sectors to ensure the necessary changes are made and the essential supports follow the individual. A whole of government approach will be essential to this, as the current siloed approach ensures that issues can fall between the span of different areas and fails members of the existing and potential workforce from fulfilling their own individual potential, and for employers to reap the benefits of their talents. With that, they're my opening remarks. I'd now like to ask Minister Damien English, who has said a few words for us and by way of video, and so we'll play that video and then I'll come back and introduce Minister Rabbitte.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to join you today to mark the launch of the position paper on disability and employment, produced by Ibec and Employers for Change. I want to thank all involved in this production of this document. I firstly want to acknowledge the role employers of all sizes play in providing sustainable job opportunities for communities right across the country. Since my appointment as Minister for Business, Employment and Retail, one of my key objectives has been to work with businesses who deliver high quality and sustainable enterprises and employment across all sectors. I know we've had a difficult year, but now we're moving into the recovery phase and hopefully we can get back to job creation and sustainable jobs. To achieve this objective, an interdepartmental approach is needed, and consequently I have responsibility for a range of activities across a number of government departments, including the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, but also the Department of Social Protection, working along with Minister Humphreys. We all know that engaging in employment has a positive impact on many aspects of a person's well-being. Furthermore, better employment outcomes are likely to lead on to better health and social inclusion outcomes. And I believe the new approach of blended working will be a real game changer in this space, with remote working becoming a permanent feature. According to the latest EU Statistics on Income and Living Conditions data, an analysis of consistent poverty rates by principal economic status shows that the consistent poverty rate was highest among individuals not at work due to illness or a disability at 18.1% and lowest among those who were at work at 1.3%. So it is clear that improving employment rates for people with disabilities is essential and is particularly important for young people with disabilities who are most likely to start out with lower employment rates. A key objective of mine and of this government is to improve the lives of people with disabilities in a real and practical sense. So I really welcome today's discussion, and more importantly, this policy paper with its analysis and with its list of recommendations for us to action. The State has a range of supports and processes already in place to engage with and support people with disabilities to identify and then to achieve their employment ambitions, some of which are mentioned in this policy paper, but we're always open to improving these. There has recently been a number of positive developments in relation to the various supports and services provided by government through the various departments. In Budget 2021, the government introduced a number of improvements, including an increase of €20 in the earnings disregard for recipients of both the disability allowance and also the blind pension. In addition, a €1,000 training grant to help people with disabilities who are seeking employment was introduced by the Department of Social Protection through the Employability Services programme. Other changes introduced in recent years include establishing a fast-track reapplication process for people with disabilities who take up employment but subsequently lose that employment, also mentioned in the report. Also enabling people with a long-term disability to retain their free travel pass for 5 years if they take up employment. Similar action about the medical card is required. In addition, where a person in receipt of disability allowance wishes to undertake employment, the requirement that work be of a rehabilitative nature has been removed. The programme for government commits to fine-tuning schemes such as the wage subsidy scheme, and the Department of Social Protection are carrying out a review of this subsidy, in addition to a review of its reasonable accommodation fund grants, which is part of also your recommendations. The Department of Social Protection will also shortly be launching a new work placement experience programme, which will be open to job seekers with a disability. This should happen later in July. This is a key policy initiative under Pillar 2 of the National Recovery Programme that was launched by Government on the 1st of June and has the potential to provide new opportunities for job seekers with a disability to gain valuable work experience, training and development. Again, another one of your actions that was mentioned in this policy document. This is one of a number of important new measures aimed to help those who have lost their jobs to find a new one, to retrain or to develop new skills, in particular for emerging growth sectors, and is part of the post-pandemic National Economic Recovery Plan. There is an onus on all of us to care about and to engage with the issue of improving employment opportunities for people with disabilities. As well as using the full range of available state supports, employers also need to commit to fully supporting employees and potential employees with disabilities and be aware of their obligations in this space. And I'll be happy to work with you on that in the years ahead. The provision of reasonable accommodation by all employers for both job seekers and employees is a legally enforceable right. We know that employers want to offer meaningful and sustainable employment opportunities, but often need information, guidance and support to do that. And this paper is very timely and very useful in that respect to guide our work in this area. The policy paper being launched today will raise awareness of some of the supports that are already available for employers, but they may not know about them. Critically, the paper points to the need to take a collaborative approach to ensure that the necessary supports are available and are easily available. Forums such as the Comprehensive Employment Strategy Implementation Group, on which Ibec are represented, provide the ideal opportunity for progress on these matters, because I understand that the majority of employers want to assist in this space. In conclusion, changing attitudes towards people with disabilities and supporting job seekers with disabilities will not only lead to positive outcomes for employers and employees, but for all members of the workforce and for our society as a whole. I would like to thank Ibec and Employers for Change for the invitation to input into this event today. And I'm sorry that I can't be there in person, but I look forward to working with you on these actions into the near future. Finally, I wish you every success with the remainder of this afternoon's proceedings.
So it's my great pleasure to hand over now for the panel discussion to Christabelle Feeney, who is the Director of Employers for Change. So Christabelle, over to you to introduce the panel.
Thank you very much, Danny. Hello, everybody. As Danny said, my name is Christabelle Feeney. I'm a white female with blonde hair and blue eyes, and today I'm wearing a long-sleeved lilac dress. As Danny mentioned there, I'm the Director of Employers for Change, which is an employer disability information service. And I'm delighted to be here today to launch this policy paper by Ibec Employers for Change and the Open Doors Initiative. Thanks to Danny McCoy, CEO of Ibec, for opening the session, and to Minister of State for Business, Employment and Retail, Damien for his support and for his kind words this afternoon. This policy paper sets out a number of key recommendations, which are timely considering the statistics that we have heard from Danny around employment amongst people with disabilities, and also because Ireland is currently drafting its first report under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. As Danny mentioned, that actually looks at disability through a social model lens. And it's through that scope that the recommendations have been written within this policy document. The recommendations seek to tackle the barriers that have been created by society, attitudes, and society as a whole. But we're delighted as well to be joined by Minister of State with responsibility for disability, Anne Rabbitte. We also have Seán Brady, co-founder of Cloud Assist, which is a Microsoft small business specialist, and Dr. McGann, who's the head of social policy at Ibec, to discuss the policy paper and its key recommendations. So I would like to start first by coming to Dr. McGann, who is actually at the forefront of the creation of this policy paper. Minister English has mentioned there that there are plans to implement some of the recommendations held within this document, which of course is welcome news. But can you talk to us a little bit more and flesh out the details of the document, just adding to what Danny has said about it? Why has Ibec published this, and what are the recommendations that are held in it? And if I can just ask you to give a visual descriptor of yourself to begin.
Thanks very much, Christabelle, and hello everybody. As Christabelle said, my name is Seán McGann and I'm the head of social policy with Ibec. I'm a white woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, and today I'm wearing a green short sleeve dress. So the area of diversity and inclusion in the workplace is extremely important to Ibec and our members, and that includes supporting and promoting the employment of people with disabilities. When it comes to disability, different employers are at different stages. So we've worked with employers on their experiences and concerns, have raised awareness about the lived experience of individuals with disabilities who are navigating their recruitment systems, the supports available, and also shared best practice of other employers who've successfully recruited and retained people with disabilities in their organisations. However, overall in Ireland, as it is globally, the success rate for the employment of people with disabilities is just not strong enough, and Danny talked to some of those statistics. So in collaboration with Employers for Change, we wanted to take a closer look at the focus and the direction of expenditure of public funds in this area, both the income and the employment supports, to identify where the priorities were and whether changes in that approach could help yield better economic and societal outcomes for individuals, but also for employers and ultimately wider society. So we examined in detail the barriers to employment facing people with disabilities, things like the loss of benefits, both perceived and actual, the rules around retaining benefits compared to the number of working hours, or indeed the fear of not requalifying for benefits if their condition deteriorated or indeed if they lost their job. We also examined the challenges for employers, such as concerns about risk or misperception of what's actually involved in reasonable accommodation. Sometimes it can be thought of as something that's extremely costly or extremely complex, and we looked at how we could debunk some of those ideas. We looked at how to attract, recruit and retain a person with a disability, and other challenges, indeed, including the fear of actually getting it wrong. We also looked at the difficulties with available grants, which were seen by many as being administratively burdensome, with delays of weeks for payments to come through, other grants not being fit for purpose, such as the personal reader grant, which funds an individual for work-related reading, despite the fact that most people now are using assistive technology, and also how grants for assistance were only provided at certain stages instead of as a continuous in-work support to aid both retention and progression. And then we did some modelling to look at the expenditure in this whole area. We looked at how we would understand the situation further. And we found that for every euro being spent on direct income supports for people with disabilities, so that was things like disability allowance, invalidity pension, blind pension. So for every euro, the state is only spending 2.4 cents on employment supports. So things like the employability service, the partial capacity benefit and disability activation and employment supports. So €1 on income supports compared to 2.4 cents on employment supports, which, given our ambition for greater numbers of people with disabilities in employment, seems very low. So based on all of this, we proposed a series of recommendations, including reworking and updating the current grant system, amalgamating them into one grant that would cover all the employee needs, empowering the person with the disability to seek work with their supports already in place, and increasing the amount of the subsidy for people with disabilities and removing the work threshold to enable more people with disabilities to access work, including on a part-time basis, if that's what suited them, their particular needs best.
Brilliant. And Minister Rabbitte, just to come to you, thank you so much for joining us today and for showing your support to this paper. As Minister of State for Disability, what are your thoughts on the paper and the recommendations? Cara has just gone through some of them there. So if we could get kind of your thoughts on it and what we're proposing, and if you could also start by giving a visual description of yourself, please.
Thank you very much, Christabelle, for the invite here today and sharing your space with me. So I am a white female. I have brown hair, blue eyes, and today I'm wearing a long sleeve beige jacket, and I'm sitting in the convention centre, and if you hear a bell go off, I'm called for a vote. In response to your paper, and can I just thank Danny for his opening remarks to start with. I love the idea of this social contract to start with, and the holistic model of looking at the person and where the person lives and how the person works and how they are supported. Also, Cara, in relation to the document that you were after speaking to, I really welcome. I think it's a fantastic document, to be quite honest with you. I spent the last 10 months trying to work out what the barriers are for the employee and for the employer, and you have produced a document where I have it all in one, which is fantastic because it'll feed into the comprehensive employment strategy. But Christabelle, in answer to your question there, I think what I found most amazing about it was exactly what Cara spoke to here, was the barriers to the employee, the barriers to the employer, and also then where it wasn't really knitting in together, which is really to do about the awareness, the grant purposes, and actually some of it, while it is there, wasn't fit for purpose in the current context. But from an employee point of view, it really, there's a number of issues that are really concerned. One is the lack of the loss of a medical card, and that could be somebody that would have had a motorbike accident, a car crash, and they need prosthesis. And the cost of a prosthesis, if they didn't have a medical card or that medical support, it can be sometime 15 or 20,000. So that's one real barrier. The other one then is the fear it mightn't work out, the safety net. That is always the big, until persons get adjusted, get back into the employment, because that's the whole confidence building. And then for the employers, it really is down to the awareness and what they hear anecdotally from other people who have supported people to return into the workforce was how cumbersome the grant application is, how long it takes it to get adopted and fit for purpose. And then it isn't at the various stages of supporting. It always is at the start, but there could be continuous learning required or continuous support required for the individual. And I've yet to find an employer who is not open in support of wanting a person to return to work or to make fit for purpose accommodation. And the other piece out of all of this, and I think this is where COVID has brought us to us, is that we can work anywhere. There is that opportunity of the remote working piece and the assistive technology. So we need to also knit that in. And I think that's what this document does. So there's huge potential within this. I'm a very plain speaker, and sometimes I would say there's a lot of low hanging fruit here that if we work together, as Danny said, in a collaborative format between business and government, and hearing the voices of the person with a disability, this can work. We can knit this together, but we need also a commitment, and it's in our programme for government to fine-tuning actually how we support industry, because we need to come off the bottom run of the ladder because we're not performing well with our other European states.
Thanks, Minister, and they're really, really welcome comments, and it's great to hear that there is that level of support as well within government for the proposals there, and the appetite to really create and affect change within the system itself. We also have Seán Brady with us, and Seán, as I mentioned, is the co-founder of Cloud Assist. So we're delighted to have you here with us, Seán. You're here today. You're here today to, I suppose, share your experience from an employer perspective. And I'd be interested to hear from you, what are your thoughts on the document? And was there anything maybe in particular that really spoke to you based on your experience of employing people with disabilities? You might also just give us a visual description of yourself.
Hi, I'm Seán. I'm a white male with brown hair and blue eyes. I'm wearing a black and red jacket that Microsoft actually provided to me. And as Christabelle mentioned earlier, we're a Microsoft partner and work very closely with them on issues of disability and accessibility. So first, yeah, it's great to see, a refocus on what, remote working can do for people with disability. And thanks, Minister Rabbitte, for referring to that. I think that's a game changer. And for us, we've been a remote first company since September of 2018. So nearly 4 years or three years of where we've never visited a client. All our employees are remote and never have to visit a client. And we were able to actually take on an incredibly inspiring young man called Seán Fogarty. He was featured on RTE actually there just before Christmas on My Uni Life. He was an able-bodied man who had a car accident and had a C1 spinal injury, which left him paraplegic. He can only obviously operate, his workstation using his eyes, using eye tracking software. And we came up to know about Seán because I was at the University of Limerick before COVID, telling the students about remote working as part of an initiative that I'm involved with called Grow Remote, which also is supported by the government. So thank you again for that, for the support of that. It's a great initiative, a non-profit, helping actually communities in Ireland to embrace remote working, and also then to help remote workers and companies embrace this change. And basically, Seán could not get a co-op placement while he was at the university. And that basically would have reduced his employability when he obviously was going to graduate. We then said we would take him on as a remote worker. He excelled at that. In fact, it just liberated. I think it gave him a whole new lease of life, an ability to actually gain employment. We've actually taken him on full time. So he was such an excellent student. We've taken him on full time, but it was a challenge. And Christabelle, obviously from Open Door, actually helped us, understand how to do this and how to engage in the programs. However, we did not avail of the supports. And we did that because we felt they were a bit antiquated. Because of remote working, Seán could do exactly what everyone else could do because he was able to adjust his hours accordingly. If it was a traditional office, yes, he would not have been able to operate at the same capacity as everyone else, a 9 to 5. But because of remote working, he was able to do so. And so we actually didn't avail, because it would require us and Seán to say that he was only operating at 80% of a normal person. And we weren't willing to accept that. He is operating at equal to everyone else. And in fact, remote working allows you to go and look beyond disability. And Seán's just another member of the team. So it's I think remote working is a key element, a key pillar to this. And, you know, it helps obviously people with physical disabilities and other disabilities to access employment that they wouldn't be able to do in the traditional office. So that's kind of really where what we've learned from being an employer of people with disabilities.
Thank you, Seán. And I know even actually from our talks, our one-to-one talks, and I know that how talented and how actually creative and innovative that gentleman Seán is, and could totally understand as well why those supports, you know, they weren't an attractive option. And I think you actually told, you might share it briefly with us, you told a great actually story about using or figuring out how to use a piece of software that a developer couldn't even figure out to do themselves.
That's right. That's right. It's actually on. Again, I would ask anyone to look up My Uni Life. It's on RT. You can go back and look at the series. We use a device called Virtual Presence, which is like an iPad on a Segway that you can drive remotely. Really cool piece of tech. We do it because of our commitment for the last 3.5 years to be totally remote. And we went to the manufacturer and said, could someone with, you know, a paraplegic with eye tracking software drive this device remotely and be present in another location? And they said no. But that didn't stop Seán Fogarty. So he actually tried 3 different types of software and got it working. And he was able to actually operate this thing with obviously using eye tracking software and move around in a location anywhere in the world, which basically means he's now able to move again. And I never realized this, actually, because we have been fully remote, I never realized that he could not move his own wheelchair, because I only saw him on a video conference. And believe it or not, he said it was the first time he was able to move since the accident move himself since the accident. So wow. Virtually, of course. So again, technology, I don't always want to make technology be out to the silver bullet for everything. Businesses have to change their management style. They have to also be obviously able to understand the language of working with someone with disability as well. You want to be respectful as well to their condition, but also accommodate as necessary special conditions that they may need. But again, we now have an amazing new member of our team.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Seán. I think it's really good for employers to hear those stories too, and to really show like how talented people are, and that it is really our own attitudes and the barriers that we're putting in place that can disable them. I just want to ask you, Minister Rabbitte, hearing of Seán's personal experience there and hearing, those stories and how he found some of the supports to be antiquated, as he said, how do you see the low unemployment amongst people with disabilities being tackled by government? So in what kind of practical measures, what would your hopes be as a minister?
Thank you, Christabelle. And can I just acknowledge all that Seán and his team have done to embrace persons with disability. And he is right, and I'm a big supporter of Grow Remote, and it is a game changer in the workforce planning. And I suppose really, Christabelle, in answer to that question is, government need to have a more agile approach and a more broader understanding of disability, because I think in the past we had a very narrow approach to how a person could actually participate, and that's the most wonderful thing about it. It should no longer be a medical model, it should be about an inclusion and integration, but that's an inclusion and integration across all departments. So in the past, when we talked disability, we really talked about disability in a medical model. We didn't talk about disability in the departments across enterprise, trade, tourism, culture. So we need to actually look across all departments and actually have an agile approach to ensuring that inclusion piece, But the most important thing here is working with the likes of Open Doors to, in actual fact, telling people about what and creating that awareness piece, and redoing the documents and taking the learning from the policy that we've heard here today as to actually how employers can actually participate easier, because they do want to participate. They do want that vibrant workforce, and there is an ability there that is totally untapped into. So that again is where I say is government wants to and will fine-tuned to adapt to the needs of the employers and listening to what the employees' barriers are. So it's a twin-track approach that's required, Christabelle, but I do believe, having met with the Taoiseach a number of weeks ago, he asked me the question. He says, well, tell me, where are the challenges with the employers? What are you hearing? Sure, I have a document now today that I can present to him where I can hear it, but I'm also hearing it from the employees. And that's where I engage with Minister Humphreys. And that's when I was in Limerick last week and I met with the Employability programme, where they tell me that perhaps when you're trying to assist people back into the workforce, that 21 and a half hours can be a barrier. Perhaps look at the 15 where you start with the 2 doors. Give everybody the support, as opposed to putting nearly another barrier in place by saying you must do 21 and a half. And that's within your report there as well. So that's the listening and learning we'll take from it. I'm very energetic to ensure that all departments actually come to the table and take the learning from the experience, be it the employers and the employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great to hear as well about employability. They're a fantastic service with wonderful people who are really committed to the work that they do. And I think we would be in agreement, all of us, on we're all working towards the same thing. We all want to see that social model being embraced and ensuring that people are getting equal access. Cara, just, I suppose, rounding up there some of the comments so far, and also taking into consideration Minister Rabbitte's comments there about the need for kind of a cross-department approach. We've obviously spoken about the barriers so far in some detail, but I think it will be really interesting for us to hear a little bit more from you about the knock-on costs, maybe, or the knock-on cost implications for some of those recommendations. I know that there are 2 kind of case studies held within that document that you referenced earlier. So if you could give us some more detail on that.
Certainly, thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, the investment of the public funds in this area is heavily weighted towards income supports, partly due to the fact that many individuals with disabilities aren't in employment, and those supports then are administered through the range of schemes and grants and allowances, such as the disability allowance or the invalidity pension. And so we took a look at 2019, and at that time the state was spending between 11,400 and 12,500 euro per recipient, with the disability allowance alone accounting for about 8% of that year's total social welfare expenditure. So if we were to rebalance the focus between the income and the employment supports, we feel there's real scope to reap significant benefits, both on the social side and the fiscal side, through expanding the employment support. So as you said, we looked at some case studies and we did some modelling to illustrate what the impact would be for an individual in receipt of either disability allowance or the invalidity pension, who then moves off those income supports and into work. And what we found was that the individual themselves would have a higher weekly income than if they remained on the payments. The savings to the state were in and around €5,000, 5,500 euro. So therefore, a person with a disability could be given an additional €5,000 in supports in the workplace, and the state would still be making marginal savings. But it would also have these huge, really significant positive outcomes for the individual in terms of their economic outcomes, social inclusion, the psychosocial benefits, as Danny mentioned earlier, on their mental health and their well-being, looking at issues like poverty and isolation, and really, from a holistic perspective, that greater integration into society. But it would also have knock-on effects for the economy, because with the reduced reliance on the supports and the cost of economic dependency, we'd also see contributions to individual tax and to spending. So really a win-win situation for all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important, that there is a need, I suppose, for cross kind of department communication and support on this, but actually there's cross department benefit to it as well. There's real benefit for various elements of society, but also the various departments. I'm conscious of time, so before I let you all go, I'm going to just come to each of you with kind of a final question. So just coming to you, Seán, what piece of advice would you give? I'm thinking of the employers who are watching here today. Maybe they haven't employed somebody before with a disability, or they don't have direct experience, and they're a little bit unsure of themselves, a little bit fearful, what's the right thing to do. What advice could you give to them?
Well, the best advice I can give is look beyond the disability. You know, there's a talent there. It's all you have to do is make sure it's like any situation you have to accommodate. But yeah, don't look at the disability first. Look at the talent that person can bring to your organization. You know, and remote working, as I keep saying, is a way of overcoming traditional barriers that we would have seen in an office. You know, about even health and safety issues and whatever. But also, you know, speak to open doors, because, you know, that's for us, you know, was a great opportunity for us to understand this. So, you know, and understand what's, you know, involved in, you know, what grants are out there. And we hope to look at grants for other people we take on. But yeah, look beyond the disability. That's my advice. Brilliant.
And it's brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of advice, Seán. And to yourself, Minister Rabbitte, as I said, Seán, there will be employers, as Cara said. We found when we were producing the document that, you know, a barrier to employment amongst the employer community can be a fear, and a lack of understanding. As Minister with responsibility for disability, and having spoken to a lot of people directly who have disability, what advice could you give to those employers?
What the first, I would agree totally with what Seán would say, but I do think, in all fairness, that to create the awareness, to engage with the open doors, to talk to the employability in their areas, to actually have that conversation, because sometimes anecdotally they're hearing secondhand information without actually looking at their case, their point in time, what they want to achieve for themselves and for their company. And I would say to everybody, take the first baby step. We're not saying that you need to take massive steps. Take that leap of faith with just one step and engage. And by us all working, making small steps, we can make a huge collective difference right across, because there's a massive talented pool out there. The last piece I will say is that, would you believe it, persons with disability from the ages of 18 and 65, over 80% is an acquired disability in that age bracket. So they already have education, they've already got a training, they've already been in a workforce. They perhaps just need some reskilling, retraining, but most importantly, encouragement and confidence building. And they will tap into the resources that they have already had. They only want to get back to work, they only want to contribute, and they actually want to pay taxes. They do not want to remain on a disability or find that as a crutch. And that's where I'm saying is, baby steps, and government will do their part.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, a key point out of what you've said there, Minister Rabbitte, is that even though an employer might feel fear of doing something wrong, it shouldn't stop them from doing anything at all, and that it's really important to take those initial steps. And I think your point there about 80% of those people within that age category having acquired a disability is really important for employers who are watching this, that they kind of understand that even if you don't have somebody in employment within your organisation right now with the disability, it's more than likely that you will either have direct experience of a disability yourself at some point, or you'll certainly have somebody in employment with you who has. And lastly, Cara, you get the final say here in terms of the panel discussion. And And I can't say that I'm giving you the easiest of questions, because I would like you actually to tell us what you'd say to government. What would you say? We obviously have Minister Rabbitte here, so what would you say to government in terms of this paper and the importance of it and what needs to happen next?
I think we've a real opportunity here to move the dial for the employment of people with disabilities. You know, we made commitments in the comprehensive employment strategy for people with disabilities, which is now almost 6 years old, and we need to now maybe tailor our actions further if we're going to achieve those commitments. On the one hand, we absolutely have work to do to alleviate those employer concerns, and I love the idea of baby steps that Minister Rabbitte mentioned, because those concerns may prevent them from engaging on this issue. And Ibec and Employers for Change are actively doing that, because we know the employer's role is extremely important in this area. But we also need to have those fully functioning, appropriate and meaningful supports to encourage both people with disabilities and the potential employers to engage, rather than adding blocks, I guess, to the process or putting people off from getting involved. I think we've come a long way. I think this area, as we've said, is going to require that collaborative approach between the public and private sector, and a whole of government approach, so that people don't fall between the cracks. And I suppose that we don't fail members of our existing and our prospective workforce from fulfilling their potential. But I think it's really been great to hear such positive messages from Minister English and Minister Rabbitte, and we really look forward to working with them in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's all that we have time for, unfortunately. I suppose the takeaway comments or points from today really is that improving employment opportunities for people with disabilities is critical, and is a critical element for enhancing the quality of life for individuals, for their families, but that there's also substantial gains for employers to be made. People with disabilities are exceptionally creative and innovative people, and they do have a right to employment. And business owners and the broader economy have an opportunity to really thrive by ensuring that those employment opportunities are provided and are met. A full copy of today's policy document is available at ibec.ie, and I would really encourage everybody to take some time to read that. Thanks so much to all of our speakers today. It's been wonderful to have you, and to have each of your perspectives actually on the document and on the employment for people with disabilities as a whole. Thanks to Ibec and the Ibec team for their time, and to particularly Dr. McGann for all of the work that has been done on this policy document, and also to the team for ensuring that this webinar has run pretty smoothly today for us as well. So we really appreciate that. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the Open Doors Initiative. Thank you to our Irish Sign Language interpreter, who has had a really hard job of keeping up with me talking really fast, and to AI Media for providing the captioning for this event. Please take time to check the Employers for Change website, employersforchange.ie, to find out how we can assist you as an employer in this area, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.